all of us focused on. Taiao must be recognised in its own right. Te aki te whenua, te aki te, te whakapapa. We can't go on our own without our taiao, Papa Tuanuku, and all her tamariki being recognised as entities in themselves with their own rights. The third one, mokopuna achieving their full potential in a natural way. And there was talk about how wonderful it would be if all our whanau convened regularly. It was just a natural way of being. And that they looked at the lessons from the past. They taught our mokopuna at the knee of the people they should be learning from at their own kaumātua, and it helps people to express rangatiratanga today by having whānau convene regularly, and he rōpū whānau, call it what you will. Really, we're talking about whānau order there. Healing. Everybody spoke about healing, breaking down those institutions that are smashing us, like prisons, like the criminal justice system, and looking how we can reclaim and reinstitute our own institutions, how we can use constitutional structures to shore up the relationships we have with Te Taiao, and how we can get the division, well, I think it's just well-being in all of its senses, healing our communities. The final one was talk about returning to an ecosystem that we determine ourselves that we own. And this stemmed from kōrero that came from one of our Pākeke about how our tupuna navigated their way across the world, across the Southern Pacific, without GPS or any modern things. And we owned everything that we belonged to, and it belonged to us. That we recognized the traditional methods that evoked us to be those people in the past and in the future. And the final thoughts that came from our group were that we needed clarity and perseverance when we do finally engage with this Kawanatanga sphere, but we must go on with this work whether or not the other side of the partnership comes on board. And that is why it's so critical for us to be speaking to our tauiwi out in their communities now, because the politicians will go where the people go. And so if we can take those people with us, Kawanatanga will come on board. Nō reira ko oti au mo tēnei wā. Let me just shut this down and come back to your lovely faces. That was from our rōpū.
Oh, kia ora Anahira. We might jump over to Ataro's group now. That's all right.
Yeah, ka pai. So we started off the kōrero, and obviously one of the key things was what I took away from the kōrero was kōrero, right? And having that kōrero tika, i wanganui a tātou. So ensuring that even when we're looking to strengthen something, it's got to be that kōrero i wanganui, or that hononga, I guess. We talked about a bottom-up approach and how that works, but then later on we moved into how it's kind of more working both ways, but I'll talk about that. Rangatiratanga, I guess one of the components was definitely that leadership. So how can we change and develop leadership both whanau, hapu, iwi, marae level, so ensuring that we're starting I guess small, and then having that same ripple effect going out to and going up. We had perseverance. We talked about perseverance, and we've been persevering for a very long time. So that was kind of the kōrero that came up there. Is we've been perseverance, and there are a lot of answers that come in, but that was the kōrero around the three qualities that will help us develop a strong rangatiratanga sphere. Is enhancing that rangatiratanga or leadership at the different tiers, but that way it'll give us a stronger bottom-up approach. And kanohi kitea, which is what was spoken, and choosing where to be or where we want to be present as Māori. So choosing where we want to have our faces shown. And that linked obviously to our communication, our kōrero. The second was, pāta tuarua, what three values will we take? And we really encompassed a lot of the models around the world. So, and those brought in a lot of discussions, which was great. But one thing that was brought up was structure in place. So, and Billy, feel free to jump in here. Geographical identity was kind of what was brought up, but then also we live also in a very cosmopolitan internet world, and so how we can navigate that as whanau hapu iwi with the appropriate structures. Then with the external models, we also talked about the county model. I think that would be correct. Hey, Billy, which was, I guess, the different levels or different models of governance. But then the answers came into play when we talked about persistence, resilience, and finance. So the three values, well, the three things that were needed in order for us to live that was, again, we talked about tikanga being proper, but what tikanga looks like and what that encompasses. So being persistent is kind of a tika in itself. And then that encompasses obviously kaitiakitanga, manakitanga, whanaungatanga, and how all of the values that we talked about were kind of different components to a journey. Then we talked about the conversations this morning really emphasised how Māori want to be in charge of their own affairs, and again relating to that first part of kanohi kitea. So we're in charge and we're showing face where we want to show face, but also having that control of our rohe at a local level, and then being part of the conversation, showing our face again at a national level where appropriate, and restoring balance. So kia ora Anahira for leading into that, because yeah, balance was a big one as well, restoring balance and what that looks like. That kind of encompassed most of our kōrero there. There was a keynote that I took, which was about reverse mentorship, again, starting at a small whanau community level marae and then building its way up. And then tuatoru, what three ideas will we take to our vision for a transformed constitution was that just that rebalancing everything that in our and the taiao came into play there. So we talked about obviously tautoko in the kōrero this morning around Papa Tuanuku, and you know, if she's living well, then we're living well, and vice versa. But also there was the discussion around tupua te awa, which was.
Do you want tokorarangi to kōrero about that? That might be good to hear.
Oh, yeah, Kaya.
Is he there?
Did you want me to talk on that?
Quick, yep, just a brief one.
Sorry, I'm just in the middle of lunch, but I'll just move to another room.
Are you there, tokorarangi?
Kia ora, kia ora. So, one thing I brought up with our group was the Tawa Tupu Act. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with, and but the changes that has made and brought, and so it recognises, for those who don't know, it recognises that Tawa Tupu is its own living entity, and that and so from that act came 4 kawa, and those kawa have brought around this group called Te Kōpuka, which are full of members that are leaders of their own communities that have anything to do with Tawa Tupu. And so these are communities like DOC, Ministry for the Environment, regional councils, Horizons, all those kinds of people. And what has happened is that from the kawa, we've kind of brought an understanding to them and kind of built their own capacity to hold kawa themselves and practice those kawa and in their own communities and make decisions from those kawa. And so I guess what's cool about that is that what we do every day, what we've been doing every day, practicing our tikanga and all that every day since the beginning of our arrival, it's now translating into these other communities, not just our whanau and hapu. So it's not, we're not the only ones contributing to the movement there and looking after our awa. But yeah, that's all I had to add to them.
Kia ora. Sorry, Ataro, was there anything else from your rōpū?
No, that covers most of it. That was the point we finished on. Is and it's just total point that.
Ka pai. Adrian. Are you there, Adrian? Who from your rōpū?
Kia ora tātou, tuaka. Kia ora tātou, tuaka ki te mihi atu ki a koutou. Yeah, look, our awesome team of Zoe, Claire, Jason, Chrissy, and David. I really appreciate the Rangatiratanga sphere. One of the things that was mentioned was that a lot of the kupu kind of overlap into the next bit. So I might just mention some of those things that come up. And aroha mātua, we ran out of time for inviting someone to pick it up. But I'll invite any of
Sorry, Adrian, are you able
to?
Sorry, Adrian, you're glitching in and out. Is there a way that you can try and stabilise that? And we might go over to Kiriana's rōpū, if that's all right. And
okay, you do that, and I'll just do that in the hotel. It's not as strong as I thought it would be. Okay, kia ora.
Kiriana.
Kia ora. Well, we had a very impassioned group that shared willingly with what they believed and what they had done. A lot of the threads that came up have already popped up in the earlier feedback. And certainly, leadership seemed to come up, sort of what we liked, what we didn't, and the challenges and heartache and opportunities around that, and how to strengthen that in a way that challenges the status quo when you still come out still standing and still alive, I guess. So very similar, stories, and I guess the whole thing of leadership will be what takes us forward and how we do that. So in terms of the qualities that we looked at that will help us develop a strong rangatiratanga sphere, whanaungatanga and wairuatanga came through, arohatanga, and we talked about the difference of what aroha tika, aroha pono, ways to keep safe, but also how to call things out and how to keep the person doing the calling out, keep them safe, and also for the person you're calling out to feel safe and their mana be intact too. But I guess the underlying thing of that, we still need to go there to get the different kind of reality that we're after. And there was a strong talk about leadership is more just a status, a name, and whatever. It's really about how we act, how we behave, and I think we have to look at that as promoting that a bit more, because I know that sometimes when we talk about behaviours and actions and values, we're told, what I've been told in the past, oh, that's just the soft stuff, that's the soft skills. But actually without there, nothing actually is hard and strong anyway. And we talked about also maiatanga, so that's the bravery and the courage to go do what needs to be done. So I'll leave that there. As I said, a lot has been spoken about. What 3 values will we take to a transformed constitution? I just want to come back to the whanaungatanga and Paula. Paula, are you there on? Because Paula talked about Waikato and Te Ara Taura. Paula, do you want to talk briefly about that as a great model?
Kia ora. So this was a whakaaro to move forward, and it was really acknowledging how Waikato's Te Ara Taura is a model that could be used to help us move forward. And one of the things I liked about the model is the inclusivity and the balance. So you have every marae is represented there, and they have a kaumātua, a kuia, and a rangatahi rep on the Te Ara Taura, and I think that's really important when we're talking succession as well. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Also, there was, the strong relationships came through for better outcomes. We also, Herb, talked about ahikātanga and whakapono and gave us some extra modelling and information around that. Herb, are you there? Would you like to talk about those two in particular?
Aye, so ahikātanga, kia ora koutou homa, is about nurturing a sense of duty and how, in its basic form, it's about keeping the home fires burning and having a presence at the kāinga. But for our hapu of Ngāti Torihina ki Mataka, ahikātanga is about integrity and representing your hapu and your whanau, no matter what arena you're walking in, no matter what arena you're talking in. So ahikātanga is about preserving the integrity of your hapu, yourself and your whanau, and doing your utmost to preserve all the rights of your people. So that was ahikātanga. It's just a sense of duty, ne? And the other one was whakapono, being speaking the truth, speaking there's that saying, honesty is the best policy. Well, that's not exactly true. You've still got to exercise manaakitanga when you're being honest. You can say what you like, but as long as you're making a point of being careful and caring about how it's being received. And so, sorry, that was manaakitanga, but coming back to whakapono, it's about being able to speak your concern and your truth in a manaaki way, and also being trustworthy. If you say you're going to do something, do it. That's how, to behave like a rangatira. Our rangatira didn't just talk fluff and we just all talk. They had action too. Yeah. Ne? Kia ora. Ka te kōrero mō tēnei wā.
And what 3 ideas we'll take forward? I obviously can't count, but tangata whenuatanga came through. That was from Herb too, and he talked about the strength of haputanga, talked about haputanga and the strength of hapu, and also, whanau whanaungatanga. One important thing also coming through was for us to remember that tikanga is law, L-A-W, and not to have it dumbed down as being L-O-R-E. That tikanga is it is what we are, it is what we live by, and not to have it kind of lessened and dumbed down. And in terms of, I guess, strengthening at that national level, and I'm going to use this to wind up our kōrero, was, we talked about, oranga tamariki as an example, and it's current and it's something that's happening at the moment. And it isn't just a matter of browning up an organisation and all of a sudden it's going to be great for Māori. And so that whatever happens, and I personally feel that sometimes with our own iwi, so if there's any other Ngāti Pro on here, turn your ear things off. But I think at times, while you may get the resourcing and the power to do whatever, sometimes, we have to stop and think, are we just creating another brown bureaucracy that's actually built on, stuff that's not Māori. So I think oranga tamariki is a good place to end, in that whatever we do at that national level, it isn't just a matter of browning up. It's about having a sort of an essence of this rangatiratanga all the way through from the ground up. Kia ora.
Kia ora kere ana, koutou mā. Adrian, have you sorted your Wi-Fi, or shall I go to hear me first?
Go to hear me first. I'm moving towards the router in the hotel.
Okay, kia ora, go hear me.
Kia ora mai anō tātou, ngā kai kōrero o te rā, me ngā toki koutou katoa ko uru mai ki roto ki tēnei wānanga. Toko whitu mātou I roto I te rūma ki reo, ko Tame, ko Safari, ko Ronnie, ko Rawiri, ko Tārewa, ana rātou ko Bāri. Kua tuhi au tētahi pukopoko nui. Te raru, ko koe hea ngā kupu kōrero ka whakarewa ke ki runga. A me huri pēr au ki roto te reo, tio. So we had 7 mātanga, rangatira in our reo kōrero, tuatahi, ko te painga, ko te āhuatanga papai kia tūrangatira ai, me noho Māori. Me noho Māori tātou, mahi I roto I te tika, pono me te aroha. Kuira ngā painga kua whakareo ake ki runga. Nui atu nā kōrero kaimuri I aua uara me ki. Hui anō huri kau ki ngā uaranga kua puta mai. So we've some of the kōrero that's come through is we need to be who we are. We can't be anyone else, and to hold fast to our tika, our pono and aroha. In terms of the three values that were raised, rite tonu ki a koutou, so manaki. Manakitanga was raised, and I think elements of kaitiakitanga was in there as well. Manaki whenua, manaki tāiao, manaki tangata. There was another value. I think it was a challenge really that that we all go together, that no one is left behind. Haere tai tātou, kia kaua tētahi e mahu e ki waho, ki muri. Kia uru kahi ka tea tātou. Ki roto e ngā mahi ki te whiriwhiri, me pēhea te hiki, te hāpai, te tohu I tēnei mea te rangatiratanga. So that whakaro was about taking everyone with us and not leaving anyone behind, and perhaps starting to build a common understanding of our own concepts. There was a mention of kaitiakitanga from one of our mātanga in the rōpū. He whakatūpato pēr, kia matara, kai whāna kōhia E te kāwanatanga nā kupu nā āhuatanga Māori. And that was about just being aware and ensuring that our concepts aren't usurped by the kāwanatanga, regurgitated as something else that we don't even recognise. So although our rōpū promoted manakitanga, there was this element of kaitiakitanga in terms of being aware and having this sense of overview of what the mahi is. In terms of three ideas to take our vision for a transformed constitution, well, hoki rā no ki taua tuāhuatanga o te manakitanga, so we'll return back to manakitanga. Engari me whai rawa ki te mahi aua mahi, but that needs to be resourced. We had an extended conversation around, haere ki te kāwanatanga me te pōtai ki roto I tō ringaringa, hoki whenua mai rāne. So is it about, asking for support in a small way, or do we affect change on a large scale? Kia hoki rawa mai te whenua a kia tātou. Nui nā kōrero. Ka Mutu. Me noho Māori mai, waihua mā ngā tikanga e whakataurite here. So if we're going to be operating within a Māori worldview, following tikanga and kaua, then that becomes the measure. It becomes the measure of success. There were some other kōrero about me te tiro tātou ki te ture whenua, te tiro ki te Constitution Act me ona pānga mai. So look at the existing legislation, wete hia, pull it apart, ka tahi ka whakahau anō, ka panoni nei, before we look at transforming it to something that will work. Ka mutu I runga I tēnei whakaaro. We had a really good conversation about the Rangatiratanga and what that looks from a hapu and whanau iwi level. And it looks like, you know, it has different attributes attached to that. I think what we are looking at as a good starting point is Rangatiratanga a motu, mana motu hake a motu, manaki, whenua tae ao tangata a motu nei. Kuina, nō reira, kia ora mai anō tātou.
Oh, kia ora he me. Adrian.
Kia ora tātou, tuaka ki te mihi atu. Look, I've aroha mai about the reception in the room. I thought it was strong. Now I'm at reception on top of the router. And I've taken my profoundly unattractive face off there to see if we can get some clear. But just give me a signal if it's not sounding. So we had an awesome group of Zoe, Claire, Jason, Chrissy, David, and I contributed at times. So given that much of the stuff that we've talked about has already been mentioned, I might just touch on some of the wee things and add some cordial to acknowledge some of the stuff that's already been said. So mana whenua was with regards to Rangatiratanga, the relationship between our people and the land, of course. Kanoro, acknowledging that a constitution needs to acknowledge the diversity within our worlds, and particularly the incredible tapestry of dynamics, but also those who have disabilities or impaired. Kotahitanga, there was much conversation again around kotahitanga. And then with regards to some of the qualities, we talked about tikanga Māori being important and strong, has already been mentioned by Hemi and others. Manaakitanga was talked about as well, and having confidence in our own. Mana motuhake or mana Māori motuhake. Also that resilience and confidence come hand in hand. And so, and simply acknowledging aroha. Some of the visions included, it was mentioned that there doesn't have to be one power place in all of this, and even acknowledging systems that aren't ours, that the federal systems in other nations, the power is shared constitutionally for them. And so we had a bit of a conversation about what that might look like on the ground. And it's really nice hearing Tukararangi talk about Tawainui or Tawa Tupu, the river, because there was also acknowledgement around, you know, Turuera is never, its relationship with Tuhui has never changed. The relationship with Tawainui or Tawa Tupu has never changed for those from the river. What has changed is the influence and relationship that those in institutions of power, both in local government, central government, are kind of adjoining that. Values of belonging, equality. I know equity is a significant issue in the kupu du jour, if you like, these days, but equality in terms of between peoples, not one people, not regulating over others. So, but it's regulated by norms. And also there was also corridor around intergenerational relationships is tēnā rangatiratanga, as acknowledged by Janelle also. So if any of the other members of our crew would like to add to that, that would be a nice wee synopsis, to use the language of the oppressor, of our wee group. So kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. I'm not missing any groups. I think that's us. So back over to you, Dad.
So I've just sent a message out to say thanks very much for the facilitation. Had a nosy in each room and heard quite a bit of kōrero. And one of the points, you know, we've wanted from today was the advocacy for strengthening rangatiratanga and mana motuhake, and that's come through. You're too kind about trying to get the relational and the kāwanatanga spheres right. You're too kind, but we'll work on that later on. But I just wonder if if there are any individuals who want to add to the feedback that's been provided from your group. And if you are, can you just sort of, you know, flick, just sort of wave a hand or do something, and we'll just we've got about 10 minutes that we can just have that if you want it. So is there anyone, any individual who wants to make a comment about anything, that's just give feedback on the feedback, or add to something that perhaps you didn't hear feedback? Kiriana? Unmute.
A point that was made, you know, about looking after our whenua and utilising it, is that, you know, the go-to was usually dairy and things we know, and that to care for it better, it's just about reimagining and being more creative in the ways we utilise it, but also to care for it in the same way. And it was, I think it was Erin, and I just wanted to get that point in from her. It's a reimagining. It's not always just starting from nothing.
Where's Erin? Do you want to add to that, Erin?
Oh, kia ora Kiriana for that. I think just to add that, yeah, I think with all of our conversations, it is about stretching the imagination. And I find that a lot when I'm talking with whanau here in my own community. I'm living here in Tawa, and I think that when we think about our tikanga as law, LAW, and then we think about how to action those things, what we shared is like, you know, how can we all do that? So Maori, Pākehā, Tauiwi, Pasifika, all of our whānau here. And there's lots of ways that I think we can start just actioning that outside of different institutions, example, like post-settlement governance entities, which are great and they're there and they exist and they have their role and everything, but things that we can do daily that don't need those imposed structures around us, such as living in accordance with the whenua and really honouring tapa tuanuku. We can all do that. Like parakore, and we're just thinking of the examples we shared within our rōpū, our gardening, regenerative agriculture, all of these sort of sustainable business models that are actually becoming more and more alive within our communities. I kind of see those as, we see those as vehicles for actioning tikanga on the ground, and at the same time as uplifting our whānau and including our whānau within those things. So yeah, that's where my imagination starts going to, and having those discussions with other rangatahi and pakeke within our communities being kind of switched my brain around a little bit in terms of how to approach things. So, koina, noipo, kia ora.
Thanks, Erin. And Erin, one of the points you've made in that kōrero, and get ready to catch a ball here, Margaret, was is that you've talked about the role that Rangatiratanga plays in leading community, and that's one of the issues that Margaret advocates for, in terms of, she uses one of the examples as what happened in terms of COVID up in the north, and the role that some of the rangatira played in leading access to community. So do you want to make a comment about that, Margaret?
Kia ora, Bill. Yeah, COVID-19 became a, if you like, a case study showing what would happen if we did exercise our own rangatiratanga. Can you hear me, Bill?
Yep.
Okay. So in that case, the key thing there was that we had leadership. It was absolutely fundamental that we had leaders who had a good vision of, one, the problem, and two, the pathway we needed to go down to fix it. And the essential thing was that we had to do it all together. And although there have been various divisions caused particularly by settlements throughout the Tai Tokerau, we put all of that aside and came together for the good of our people to make sure that we had the resources to protect ourselves from COVID-19. Now, it meant that everybody, but we're used to doing this. When something comes up that we have to act quickly and be very, very nimble, we know how to do this stuff. And so we came together as the whole of the Tai Tokerau. We came together as the chairs of the iwi and really anyone else who could contribute. So it wasn't just the iwi, it was everybody who could contribute to it. And we said to government right from the beginning, give us the resources, we will do this. And the good thing about it was that we were actually ahead of government in dealing with it. And they were like possums in the headlights. And so they just gave us the resources and away we went. And as a result of that, we not only ensured that our kuia kaumātua did not have to come to Kaitaia where COVID-19 could be picked up, where we kept them all safe, but it also built a much greater sense of community because we now had the resources to spend time out with our people. And Anahera, you might like to talk about this and how it helped to bring us all together. Not only the hapu, the whanau and the hapu of Ngāti Kahu, but also throughout the Tai Tokerau. That, to me, was a very good case study in the exercise of tino rangatiratanga. Nobody told us what to do. We made our own decisions for ourselves, and it worked. And there was nothing for anyone to be scared of. Anahera, do you want to talk about the specifics there?
Ai tēnā rā koe hoa, catching the ball. It helped that we also had some resources of our own to seed the program of going out. It was more about contact and kai and about kōrero. So the government agencies, when they realised that we were going ahead with or without them, not only did they make resources available to us, but they made them available to us in a rangatiratanga fashion. There were very few tags attached to those resources. And we heard earlier kōrero about how often government resources come with government tags. If they had, I can say that our iwi would not have taken that money. We would have struggled along using our own resources. But I'm glad to see that it is possible. And it was helped, Margaret, koutou mā, by the fact that we had many of our own people leading those agencies, like the Linden brothers. I think those are the only additional insights that I have to bring to the genesis and the terminus of a case study where the government, for a little season, treated us almost as equals, when really we're far more than that.
So, you know, it's easy for us to say the government has no role in strengthening rangatiratanga, and basically they have to keep all of their hands out of it because, you know, strengthening rangatiratanga comes from whanau, hapu, iwi, Maori organisations, and we're addressing it at the national level. But the role for government, which is the point that Margaret and Anahera have just made, is about enabling. And I think one of the things that we have to get out of this this convention is how we articulate that, what enabling looks like. And in this case, it's about the provision of funding and resources. Tracy.
Kia ora, thank you, Bill. Aroha mai, I wasn't able to join one of the groups, so these are just my personal thoughts, but I just wanted to, and I don't have any answers, but I just thought it was important to perhaps add to the kōrero, particularly around how some of the values might in the future be operationalised or implemented. And I know that's a kōrero that needs to continue, but these are thoughts that just came to my head that I thought would be good to share. And it's building upon what other speakers have talked about in terms of conscientising the people, so taking the people with you, having clear leadership and faith and trust in that leadership, but also I think capacity building of people in general. If we are really serious about revitalising our own institutions, and I'm particularly interested in our juridical system, tikanga Māori, then we need to have the capacity amongst ourselves to be able to draft the law or implement the law or facilitate the law, whatever that may look like for us. And I think the last two previous speakers have given us a really clear example in the COVID-19 situation where that organically happened. But if it's going to happen in a much more long-term and structured way, how can we ensure that our people are ready for that challenge, and how do we start building that capacity? So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing, or two more things, one is there's been a lot of kōrero around the state transferring resources, and often without conditions or with as few conditions as possible. But perhaps we also need to think about whether the tax system that we have is fit for purpose. For example, we charge tax on things like fruit and vegetables, and other countries don't do that. They don't attach a GST tax to certain goods. Should our values infuse or influence what the tax system looks like? And is it time for that to be re-looked at through a tikanga Māori lens? So I raise that because obviously Parliament is the one that determines what tax is. That's where one of the sites of power is that we've been talking about. If we are going to talk about constitutional transformation, should it be Parliament determining what the tax system looks like for all of us? Or is that something that we want to consider deeply ourselves about what that might look like for us? And the last point I wanted to make, and again, it's very much reiterating what other people have said, but just this concept of economy and what that means for us. And again, the same kinds of questions. How can a tikanga lens influence or determine the framework of the kind of economy that we want to build and live within? And I think in that video part, there was one of the speakers talked about what are the values that we have. And currently we have a value system that's very much generated by material wealth and physical appearance. But if we wanted to build an economy that looked different from that and that was infused with tikanga values, what might that look like? And then the bigger question, how is that reflected in a constitutional framework? So those are just some thoughts that I have. I don't have answers, but I just thought it would be helpful to contribute to the kōrero. Kia ora.
Thanks very much for that, Tracy, and certainly what you've talked about capacity building lines up very much with what Janelle talked about, you know, just getting us ready for taking over the world. Amelia, can I just check in? Are you still taking notes?
Yes, yeah.
Kapai, thank you. So Safari followed by Herb, followed by Jason.
Kia ora. Just to jump a little bit on what Tracy spoke about, I think particularly when she spoke about law, that there are different levels within our own communities where we do make our own decisions. You know, we decide who eats first on our marae, we decide how they come onto our marae. And so there is, I think, part of our revitalizing our jurisdictional base, I think is may or may not be a correct word for it, is recognizing that there already is some level of that, and the matter then just becomes growing that into the bigger picture, affecting more people things. I think particularly, Whai, when you spoke about economy, something that's really important, I think, is our inter relationships. In Matike Mai speaks about we had relationships where hapu and iwi were independent but interdependent. And I think us configuring how we, along with ourselves on our own marae, within our own whanau, within our own iwi, strengthen ourselves, but how we work that interdependence within the iwi that are around us. And I think those problems are probably more prevalent in lots of iwi that have overlapping claims, so particularly Te Tauihu. And I think us bringing ourselves together is a very important part. I think another thing is about us looking at Maori social organisation in the sense of what is a rangatira, what differentiates a rangatira from a person who sits on the pai, from the person who cooks the kai, from the person who digs the graves. You know, what is a rangatira? What makes a rangatira? What's the difference between a rangatira and an iwi chair? They're the same thing. And thinking about how we rebuild, you know, I saw one thing from Matua Che Wilson where he had a diagram and it had ariki, rangatira, tohunga, and they all work together. And this is more so moving from the, you know, more typical Pākehā way of, you know, one supreme leader, more of the consensual way of living and way of maintaining the law that we had. And in Sami we do that. Sami we have kui and kaumātua panels that sit there, and some have rangatahi on them. But I think really figuring out what that looks like is important. And I think one thing that we did speak about in our rōpū as well was us being really clear on what rangatiratanga is, and not letting the Crown define that for us, and also not letting the Crown reinterpret that into something else. Us having, you know, like I've already said, wānanga within ourselves about what a rangatira is. So then, therefore, what are the implications of rangatiratanga, and us having that for ourselves. And yes, that's all I've got.
Thanks very much for that. So what we're going to do is that we're going to have Herb, then Jason, and then we're going to start drifting into the plenary list. And Adrian, we've got 3 speakers on the plenary list, and you can be the 4th one on that one there. Okay, so Herb.
Kia ora no tātou. I just wanted to come back and rehash what our group raised, which was haputanga. And for the sake of me trying to reinforce, you know, this belief that I think this is where all the solutions reside at our hapu level. Empowering our hapu. I think it was Safari just recently mentioned how we do have our own law on our marae, and then growing it from there organically upwards. And so again, to me, it's about empowering our hapu to define what they believe for themselves is rangatiratanga. And for me, rangatiratanga I sum it up as the power to choose, the power of choice. And so when we have hapu and we have hapu states, for me, the convention and this conversation is about encouraging all our hapu to grab this taura and weave together, but firstly build and reacquaint themselves to who they are as a hapu. We talked about tamariki ora, and I think, you know, as an example of how bureaucracy continues to fall over, it's because the concept is great, but if that seed was sown into the whenua of the hapu, it would flourish. Because if I had got people within my hapu whose duty it is to chiaki our tamariki, I can guarantee my tamariki are going to get a greater level of care than having an outside contractor who has no whakapapa, no whānau link to this child, to look after that child. That was just an example about how focusing and empowering haputanga can improve a lot of problems. I think it was Erin who mentioned the term PSGE. I loathe these colonial terms. However, you know, a PSG is just really their description of what already exists, which is hapu. Our hapu are pre-settlement governance entities. So again, the answer is in haputanga. That is our post-settlement governance entity, and it's been in existence mai rano. The last, we talked about COVID-19 being, you know, and how iwi, and really, again, that idea was fostered at the hapu level to chiaki our kuia and kaumātua through the period of COVID-19. Again, it's empowering the hapu to do that, to look after their people. So I'm going to be a broken record every time we meet, and that's my segue into the concept of maiatanga, and just encouraging everybody to be brave, but careful enough to step up and challenge our leaders in a very diplomatic and monarchy way. And what I mean by that is pull them aside when they're on their own, go up to them and have the courage to consult with them and express to them how their behaviour wasn't up to your expectations. And the maiatanga for us all to click the link, it was with some hesitation that I read through this kaupapa and followed it, and it was mainly because of the amount of time that I wasn't sure I could devote. I was able to have this day free, and I'm glad I did. And I want to encourage everybody to be courageous, to click and go into their hapu spaces and promote this kaupapa, because I think it's timely. It's fantastic timing for us, of Ngāti Torehina, because we're, in the throes with the Crown in terms of treaty settlements, and this is the sort of framework. And for me, if we can all throughout the Mutu have some foundation in terms of constitution, then all of our hapu are going to have that consistent flavour and ingredient right through the rebuilding and resurrection of haputanga. Mauri ora kia tātou.
Kia ora, thank you. And Jason, please.
Tēnā tātou. I hopefully not sounding like a broken record, but if we're playing the same song, that must be the #1 hit of the day. So possibly, hopefully, that's what it is. I just wanted to say that I always have faith that we will do what is necessary. We will do what is right, and if we don't, we will be guided by our people. And the only hope is that we have the wisdom to be able to hear them if necessary. And so whether it's around the provision of funding and resources and how that looks, I'll leave that for when the sphere is up and running and doing what it needs to do. I think my only hesitation or my only interest is really around how do we maintain our own traditional systems and our own ancient systems of how we operate together as a sphere, as some kind of collective. And I think that probably for me the only measure of failure would be to do what we've already done, would be to do the same thing. And so I mentioned in my group that probably the best systems of how things might be done is I always go back to Mai Marae, and that there's kawa and tikana informs and validates and kind of guides how things might be done, and whether it's nature, because how it's been drilled into us at home in Mātātua anyway, is that kawa is natural law, and tikana is just how we interact with natural law and how we do that collectively and together. And so I think of systems like kawa tikana, I think of systems like tuakana taina, that with tuakana taina, there is gender doesn't matter, age doesn't matter, abilities or disabilities doesn't matter. I think of kauwairuna, kauwairaro. I think of within the tipuna whare, te tara iti, te tara nui, and how we interact with our manuhiri and tanata whenua. And so I think that whilst we're around the provision of funding and resources, that also the potential of provision of our own ancient and traditional systems that are already embedded in our DNA. We know how it works. And so I think that this is a really cool opportunity to do that. And I just wanted to pick up on one of the kōrero from Matsuhemi around the mana Maori Mutu hake. And I think that also that probably our only sole role and responsibility is to allow hapu and iwi to maintain their own mana Mutu hake. And that we don't fall into the trap that we do become the hapu, that we do become the iwi, that we are just a mechanism or conduit that holds a particular people or a kawaratana accountable, that allows the freedom that kind of Janelle talked about, that allows the freedom for our people to do what they need to do. Because certainly the tikana at Mai Marae is very different to the tikana just over the fence, over the paddock. Even though we're that close to each other, our tikana is very different. And so I would like to see that the sphere, their only role and responsibility is to ensure that Mai Marae and my people can attain and continue to remain according to our own tikanga based on our own environment, which will be very different to people who might be in the bush, might be different to people who are on the sea. And so, and I just wanted to leave nā kupu ki roto I tētahi waia ta whakamoemetia rāwiri rau ko horomona, o roto te hāhi rinatu. Whakarono e taku tamaiti ki te ako o tau pāpa, kaua hoke e whakarere a te ture a tau whaia. And really what they're talking about is that we're always guided by the tohu of Rangi Nui, and reminded around the ture or the laws, the natural laws of Papa Tuanuku. And koira iaha, nā reira tēnei kāmihi ki a tātai.
Kia ora, Jason. And really what this is about is how we can help support what you've just talked about, and certainly what you talked about, Herb, when you say you want to take this kōrero back to your marae and your hapu, is what do we need to do to support you to do that, to keep the conversations going so that we are all working together. People, we've entered the plenary stage, and in the plenary stage, we wanted the focus to be on actions. You know, what are we going to do things? And Herb's given us an example about he's going to take this kōrero back to his own hapu, and hopefully he'll take it out to other places, and other people are talking about that. And we've got a list of other further actions on the last page of the booklet, and it talks about the next steps, which were summarised both by Moana and Margaret. And Adrian will bring you in after these three who have listed for the plenary. And so we've got three people who have listed for the plenary, and we just want to hear those types of things. And we do want to hear what you're going to do and what you want us to work with you to do, and not just to tell us what to do. So we'll start off with Arama and Erin, who have, so I've got Arama and Erin, and Anahira and Chrissy, and then Adrian, you can jump in after that too. So can we start off with Arama, Erin? You're still recording, aren't you, Amelia? Yes.
Hi, Aroha Mai. Yeah, I'm still recording.
Thank you. So Arama, Erin, where are you? There's Erin, yep.
Kia ora, Bill. Just seeing if Arama's around. Okay. No, kei te pai. Well, I'll just introduce our whakaaro, and if our mate jumps on, then she jumps on. Hi. So kia ora, everybody. Tuatahi ko Ira Matariki Kato, kuingoa he uria hau nai tū hoi nā tiawa te au pauri. E noho anau ki tāne atua. So Arama and I are part of a rōpū called the New Zealand Alternative, which is a rōpū, an organisation that focuses on New Zealand Aotearoa's place in the world. And so where we connect there, so foreign policy, and in particular as Aotearoa, if we're standing on the world stage, our question really is, how can we mean what we say if we don't know who we are back home? And so the Constitution is the foundation of our identity as a nation, and it's unsettled, as I suppose that all the kōrero today shows us. We haven't landed on a constitution that really upholds values as we agree to live by them. And so our whakaaro then is to create a community of practice. What we've identified, I suppose, is so many rōpū, so many different groups around our country are gathering and are fighting different fights. And so, for example, Action Station is a fantastic example of a rōpū that's really been started in the rangatahi sphere, and it's out there just trying to uplift a number of voices. Just Speak is another example. Then there are more specific rōpū like Tawiwi mō Matike Mai, which Pa Moana mentioned today. There's Asian supporting Tino Rangatiratanga. There's Ezra. There's a whole lot of different amazing rōpū and more that I can't name right now. And I think one of the whakaaro is really to bring people together to kind of unify ourselves on what constitutional transformation looks within all of our individual kind of kaupapa. And so a community of practice is sort of what we're trying to call that. Then what we want to create from that togetherness is a legal pedagogy, which is basically recognising tikanga as LAW law. And Justice Joe Williams talks about this a lot as the third law of Aotearoa New Zealand. So first law being tikanga Māori, the second law being the imposed colonial system or crown law, and this third law that has been evolving since the 1980s, which is really what he calls a resurrection of tikanga within our legislation and in our common law as well. And we can see that he mentions that you can't talk about the Resource Management Act without talking about tikanga. You can't talk about trades or intellectual property without talking about tikanga anymore. And then we have last year with Ngāti Whātua, we have in the Ellis case, the concept of mana being debated within the Supreme Court. And there are inherent risks within those, you know, where we're co-opting tikanga within a colonial sphere of institution and law. But there's also opportunity there, and our tikanga exists elsewhere as well. So there's within our marae, obviously, within our communities and how we relate to each other. And so there's this kind of need to really translate these legal concepts and academic concepts into a more accessible and dynamic kōrero that we can hold with each other within all of our communities, including Tauiwi and Pākehā and Pacifica and our Māori communities at all different levels. So it's really that's the whakaaro, is to create a community of practice with all those people that are already doing a whole bunch of stuff and like lots of mahi in that area and lots of knowledge in that area, and then creating like a pedagogy or just really in a simple way, different resources to take those, translate those concepts out and really take them out into following Matike Mai community hui. I really enjoyed Veronica Tāwhai's kōrero this morning, where she shared how our rangatahi, that was awesome, how they translated those concepts into theatre and artwork and group activities. I really think that those things are so powerful to enabling all of us to be having these conversations. I also recognise that by the end of the century, our demographics are going to be completely different. So, and also in recognition of racism within our society and lateral violence that we talk about, where we sort of attack each other. We want to learn how to nurture these conversations, recognise those things and have a safe way to actually create space for that cross-cultural communication. So cultural embedded kind of pedagogy and resources to really have these conversations more widely. And so it's a pleasure to kōrero about this among this open plenary, and I realise we're also live streaming too, so that's our whakaaro at the moment. We've shaped it up into a proposal and we're seeking funding to sort of roll this like a wānanga series out to start off that community of practice and then see where it ends up. So yeah, that's probably all I'll say, otherwise I'll dive down a rabbit hole. Kia ora motu.
Erin, thanks very much for that. Can you, how can we work with you?
I think, not really prepared for that question, but just from the top of my head, just sitting here, I think that we're all part of our own communities and we all have our own networks of kōrero. So I think at this stage, it's just important to share these whakaaro and the idea of translating, because, you know, one thing, I've heard Justice Joe talk about this too, is we have this post-settlement era, the society where we have a whole lot of decision makers governance entities, you know, people sitting over here, and then that same community is being incarcerated over here, and that there's a disconnect. So there's, you know, and that's happening within our own communities, and then we have that other layer of the colonial system imposed on top of that. But there's a disconnection between our whanau over here who are going through the cycle of stagnation, of incarceration and addiction, whanau violence, and all of those things that come. And then there's our other whanau over here who are sitting on boards. And I'm not saying anything bad about either rōpū, obviously, but I'm saying that with our communities and networks, I think there's the way that we can help is really to start to find those connections, and that includes the translating of these concepts and the feeding back and kōrero. So in terms of how we can help in this rōpū here, I think just having those conversations, which seems to be the theme of the day as well, is keeping up the kōrero and sharing among each other. So kia ora.
Cool, thank you very much. And we will look for ways of keeping in touch and doing that, because what we're going to produce out of this is a written record and hopefully a video record of proceedings, a brief video, and we hope that, you know, that they'll be distributed to all of the participants and others. But anyway, thank you very much for that, and it's useful, and it's certainly on the theme of what we're looking for in terms of you know, trying to unite our energies and our groups and our directions and all that. So it's great to hear that, and yeah, we look forward to ongoing kōrero. Anahera, kia koe te mana.
Ooh. Can you hear me okay, Bill?
Certainly can.
Lovely. Aroha mai. I think I had my camera off and my mic on instead of the other way around. I te tuatahi ngā mihi ki te kai kōrero kona. I'm just amazed at the depths of thinking that she'd put into her proposal. But Bill, while I'm going to change my proposal up a bit, I had actually focused on whānau, but I realised that I wanted to use this opportunity to talk about the Strengthening Rangatiratanga project that I'm working on at hapu level, hapu and iwi level. And that at the November Iwi Chairs Forum, after listening to the forum resolve that it would strengthen rangatiratanga, and this convention being part of that, part of the rollout of that resolution, I spoke quietly to Bill on the side and said to him, while it's really wonderful that we're doing all this work at the national and international level, I know that there's a lot of good work being done at the hapu and iwi level as well, but is there something that we could perhaps do a case study that could have some transferable benefits, or certainly just sharing the information, a case study where we're in hapu and or iwi, identify an issue that is impacting on their rangatiratanga, mana motu hake, and work with their counterparts in the government agencies that are, you know, creating or promoting or upholding the issue in a way that's an obstacle to us expressing our rangatiratanga. Now, I had very much in mind my own iwi, Ngāti Kahu, which is dealing with a couple of environmental issues at the moment, one of them being a huge wastewater upgrade where the local district council has been operating for 11 years in breach of its own resource consent. And as a result, over the last 21 years that this particular wastewater scheme has been operating, we have seen many of our kapatakai become polluted, algal blooms just rampant on our coastline, our kutai, our kokota, all our seafoods just drying up, and we're no longer able to manaaki ourselves or our manuhiri the way we used to. We are at the moment in the Environment Court in our appeal process against them. And what we did was we identified key people within the agencies that were obstacles to us, in this case, the Far North District Council and the Northern Regional Council, key people who we felt we could work with as change agents. And while we don't want to spend all of our time educating tauiwi one at a time, I thought that if we could do a case study, one in Ngāti Kahu and the other in another iwi somewhere else in the country, and I won't name who that other might be because it's up to them to identify themselves, then we could perhaps push from the hapu iwi level a little bit in a more organised fashion, just as organised as we are doing at the national level. So that's what we have done. And the second issue that we're dealing with here in Ngāti Kahu is the Department of Conservation, and particularly around the management of DOC administered lands in the outlying areas. So we did that. We identified 2 key agents within the Far North District Council who were at very high level decision making, and we went in and we basically indoctrinated them. We educated them. We educated them on the constitutional foundations of hapu Rangatiratanga and how it had come, initially from the gods, and is given form and shape in our tikanga, our flexible tikanga. We took them right through to the arrival of their predecessors, their constitutional foundations, through to how we basically took them through a accelerated course of the report that Moana published in 2016. Talked about the different responses of our tupuna to the new iwi that had come in, their iwi who had come in, the different constitutional responses that had happened across the country. Here in Taitukara, of course, it was he hakaputanga. Elsewhere, it was kotahitanga, kingitanga. All of them with the same express purpose of dealing with this new tribe that had come in amongst us. We then took them through to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, showing them step by step how it connected to our constitutional foundations and reinforced and actually reconfirmed our constitutional foundations. Te Tiriti o Waitangi reconfirmed he hakaputanga, which was just our tupuna's response to establishing our tikanga-based constitutional foundations. They got it. They really did get it. As a result, I'm happy to report that we've made quite major progress on the wastewater issue, where we have managed to keep it out of the court, and the court is happy for us to continue this out-of-court process, which they're calling a mediation. If I were being crude, would call it a reverse indoctrination. And we have had commitment for a working group to be set up with terms of reference that start with tikanga, he hakaputanga, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and then connecting to human rights instruments that are internationally and nationally recognised, and of course the ultimate being the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That has been endorsed by the CEO of the Far North District Council, who understands that he has to attend those meetings, as do I, to keep his managers straight and on the straight and narrow, and not taking us off into the RMA and the bylaws and all that kind of thing, which just diminishes our rangatiratanga. So I just wanted to share that with you, that we are at the point where we were supposed to meet tomorrow, but because of these COVID events that we're still not going to be certain that we're clear of until the 8th of February at the earliest. Because of that, we have postponed it. I wanted to share with you, though, that the concept, I know already many of our hapu and iwi are doing it, but it is getting into the body politic of Pākehā, just getting them used to our constitutional foundation kōrero and inserting into their kōrero and their plans and their policies all the way from the very first submission through to the High Court, if need be, the specific rights that we are exercising under Te Tiriti o Waitangi under the UN DRIP, so that it becomes a way of shaping case law, if you like. Even if Parliament is still dilly-dallying around how it's going to implement Te Tiriti o Waitangi right through on the UN DRIP, we feel that by hapu and iwi consciously inserting into all of your interactions with Crown agencies, those the actual articles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the actual articles of whatever human rights instrument is relevant to the issue you're dealing with, whether it be environmental, social, educational, whatever, that we will be able to collectively push the bar to the point where it becomes accepted and normalized part of the conversation with all of those agencies, so that we don't just wait around for Parliament to change laws, but we actually start influencing where we are right now, the way that their agencies practice with us. Nō reira, I hope I've expressed myself clearly, and we will keep you very much posted through you, Bill, and maybe, although we are not reporting, this is not a project that came out of National Iwi Chairs Forum itself, it came out of a side conversation, and we didn't ask National Iwi Chairs Forum for a mandate. Hapu and iwi don't need to do that, but we recognise the value of sharing at forums like the National Iwi Chairs Forum, whatever lessons and whatever experiments and experiences and projects that we are doing. So, ko oti au mo tēnei wā, kia ora rā.
Kia ora rā, Anahira. And what we're hoping is that that Ngāti Kahu and the other iwi will actually develop a template that we can apply at the national level. So it's the national Rangatiratanga movement, learning from the bottom up, and except I should put you at the top instead of the bottom, but it's learning from what whanau, hapu and iwi do. And so that's an exciting project. So thanks very much for that, Anahira. Chrissy. Unmute, Chrissy. Unmute.
Unmute. Aroha mai. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity to share with this rōpū the commitment and the vision of work that Kapo Māori Aotearoa is working on. Firstly, Kapo Māori Aotearoa is the organisation I've had the privilege to lead for many years, and we're a national Indigenous disabled-led society that was set up by Kapo, and our members describe Kapo as blind, deaf-blind and low vision Māori and their whanau in 1983. To realise their vision of a by Māori for Māori national network governed by whaikaha Māori and whanau. Since our formation, we have, as we started, led by whaikaha Māori and their whanau, and are a kaupapa Māori governed and managed organisation, a national organisation. Our focus is on supporting whaikaha Māori and whanau to realise their prosperity and well-being. So our background is one that came, I suppose, in the new words that are being used in today's concept around whaikaha Māori Rangatiratanga. The conversation for our founders started in 1983 and as an outcome, we were formed. The vision of our founders and our leaders and members has always been to see other whaikaha Māori establish themselves as a national voice and body. And we've, over the years, assisted to help other, like Turi and other whanau, to look at that vision. But it's hard. it's hard because for our community, we're locked within even though they say institutionalism is gone, yeah, it isn't. Yeah, we're in an environment that, with the introduction of the United Nations Convention for the Rights of Disabled People, brought in a new era for the disability community, a positive one, which gave them certain ability to, through that convention, to work with government on improving their approach and delivery of services to disabled people. Sadly for Whaikaha Māori, our community is a minority within that group. And so our identity and the whole way that we view and communicate and work with each other is very different. So we started way back in the 2000s, a conversation of how could we support and the development of a collective network of Whaikaha Māori throughout the Mutu. And we looked at, using the traditional Te Ao Māori concepts of community. And in 2019, we called a summit of 2 other national bodies, but they hadn't formalized as such. One was a Turi Deaf Māori group, and the other was a collective of Pacifica, people with visible and non-visible impairments. That summit started the conversation around establishing one national body or entity where each group contributed their knowledge and skill and developed the capacity of not only the Indigenous people, but our whanau from the Pacific. On the 23rd of January, my board and members of our Rangatahi network group and staff got together to look at how we can move us to the next level, especially since having the opportunity and the honour to work on progressing Matike Mai Aotearoa and constitutional change, which we were involved right at the beginning with when Margaret and Moana talked about the consultation hui. There were many Whaikaha Māori and their whanau involved in that too. So we've had that voice there, and Kaabo Māori Aotearoa does not see itself as the leader of all of Whaikaha Māori. We are just here to help. We feel to help our community to find their own identity and that, because we are national, and yes, we've been through it and we've survived. It's not always been easy, but what's kept us true to who we are is our members and our right as tangata whenua to this land. So what my board and our rangatahi and staff confirmed at our workshop on the 23rd of January, and I'd like to acknowledge Bill here because he came to our hui and worked with us to help us to get some clarity around our whakaaro and also our to support how we could develop this vision that we've had for over 35 years. So the first commitment that we make and reaffirm is that we will work, Kaabo Māori Aotearoa will work with the Iwi Chairs Forum Working Group on Constitutional Transformation to develop a strategy and plan that unites and strengthens the Rangatiratanga of whanau hapu iwi and Māori organisations such as ours and our other rōpū within our community of Whaikaha Māori. This including coming to a common understanding of kotahitanga and the Rangatiratanga spheres. We will contribute to strengthening mana motuhake by working with our community, Whaikaha Māori and whānau throughout Aotearoa, to realise our individual as Whaikaha Māori rōpū and collective as a national Whaikaha Māori forum. right to make our own decisions for our own lives in accordance with He Whakaputanga and Te Treaty o Waitangi. Sadly, what's occurring in our community is that those rights have been taken away from our community. We're currently going through the disability is going through a transformation of services. And although the intent of government is there, being a minority within in this area is one that many struggle with. And I listened to around the corridor around browning up and things like that, and we feel that, we understand that, or giving, you know, where government is very interested now in treaty partnership, but it's their interpretation sometimes, but they're open to discussion around it. How we will initiate conversation with Whaikaha Māori and whanau, or we will initiate this conversation with Whaikaha Māori and whanau to contribute to Matike Mai Aotearoa constitutional change through talking with their whanau, hapu, iwi, friends and allies. So it's rejuvenating our community to get the conversation going again within their networks. Secondly, we want to affirm our common understanding within Whaikaha Māori and whanau as what do we mean as a collective when we talk about Rangatiratanga. That conversation has never occurred as on a collective, on a national level within our community. A lot of individual comments, we have a position as an organisation, but our position is our position. It's not the voice of the Whaikaha Māori community katoa. The other thing we want to do is how will we, again, having this corridor, how will Whaikaha Māori exercise our authority in accordance with the corridor and what's in Matike Mai. The other thing we want to do is have corridor about realising a national Whaikaha Māori forum in accordance with the constitutional vision on Model 2 of the Rangatiratanga sphere. And then we want to confirm the 3 priorities of the National Whaikaha Māori Forum. Some of the work we did on the 23rd of January was putting down the thoughts of our group.
Could you start winding down, please?
Sure, I'm near the end.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So what we would like to do is work with Matike Mai, the consultation group, to facilitate hui with Whaikaha Māori and whanau as part of the consultation process. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, and one of the things we're talking about with Kapo Māori is having closer connections to iwi, where to build part of that work going forward. So thank you very much for that, Chrissy. Adrian, you've asked for 60 seconds before we hand over to final comments. So Adrian, over to you.
Yeah, they said I couldn't do 60 seconds. So look, I just want to acknowledge, and I want to, actually it's quite good coming in after Whaia Chrissy, because I want to acknowledge inclusiveness and just acknowledge the inclusiveness and diversity and around other. You know, I'm very much aware that in the video you showed before, Anjan Rahman was also on there. And so I want to just say that acknowledge the inclusive Aotearoa collective, which of course much of Bill has been significantly giving stewardship and support for them. And I say that because, you know, if there's any groups of people that understand other, and I'm sorry if other's one of those words that we, you know, it's just not really trendy today. I just want to acknowledge that there's a period of time where support and be inclusive around the incredible diversity within Aotearoa. So that's my 60 seconds. So it's my plug for inclusiveness, inclusive Aotearoa collective. Tāhono. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just checking. We don't seem to have Moana back on with us, do we? Kim?
No.
Okay then. So where we're at now, people, is is I'm going to hand over to Margaret to make wrap up comments. But before we do that, can I just invite you to just put on your chat what you will take away from this convention, and that'll just help us organise the next one. So on your chat, just flick them off, and we'll just get whoever else is at the end of that to clean them up and drop them down or whatever they do. But hassle them with a chat, just what you will take away from this convention. Just that, I'd really appreciate that. So Margaret, they're going to be typing while you're finishing up, please.
Kia ora Bill, kia ora tātou katoa. Ka nui taku mihi ki a koutou katoa. This whole day has just blown me away to see the clarity of thinking that is out there, that people are asking the important questions. Just the things that come to my mind is that people are asking for clarity around what is leadership, what is Rangatiratanga, how can we make sure that this happens? There's just no question that we have a right to make our own decisions for ourselves. So that has not been questioned at all. And really it's about what is the clear way we can go now in order to be able to return that decision making that we know is ours, to actually return it to ourselves, and to make sure that that actually happens. And that's the main thing we want to see, is how's that going to happen? Now, we've had lots of examples given to us as to how we might go about doing that. And I can't but help but go back, and this is where I'm thinking especially around the kōrero of haputanga, but I actually go further back than that, and I go to whanau. And I think about my own whanau and what our kaumātua told us to do when we got to a point where we were all fighting amongst ourselves about having to pay rates that had gone through the roof, and there was no way in the world we could afford to pay those rates. And we were under threat of losing the last lot of land that we had. And the strength that our kaumātua gave us to fight that has stood us in such good stead, where they simply said to us, why are you bothered about the Mangonui County Council and what it has to say about your rates? These lands do not belong to the Mangonui County Council. These lands are your ancestors' lands. These are whenua tupuna. You were handed them down and you were given them to look after and pass on to the next generations. And the way in which you will do that is the way you know how to live on this land. And they just took our fear of being dictated to by a very unsympathetic council and very unsympathetic laws in this country and said, put them to one side. Leave them out there. That is how the Pākehā operates. Leave him to do that himself. Now, the way you need to live is, and then that started when they started teaching us, we would hold wānanga on what is this thing mana? What is this thing mana whenua? What is rangatira? What is rangatiratanga? And they walked us slowly through all of that stuff. And what was so empowering about that, and that really strengthened us as a whānau, was it all made sense to us. It is who we are. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt abnormal. It all made sense. It was all comfortable. We weren't having to struggle with concepts that we didn't really understand that belong in the Pākehā world. And our kaumātua made it clear to us that that's because we have our own ways of doing things. When we're on our land here, we know what we've got to do in order to make sure we've got water, in order to make sure that we've got kai, whether it's planting your gardens or going fishing in the sea. There are certain rules around that. And so right what Jason was saying, and the tikanga across the fence, across the road is quite different from the one over here. We all know that. And not for my whanau to go and tell the whanau over the other side what to do. Not my territory. And so it's the exercising of the mana and the rangatiratanga mana. As I said, our kaumātua said to us, that is your absolute power and authority that you inherited from the gods. And no one can take that from you unless you let them. So just don't let them. And then your rangatiratanga is about exercising that mana and making sure that the people, rangatira, for our kaumātua explained rangatira as ranga and tira, where ranga is a shoal of fish that they all swim together, and tira is a group of people. And the question was asked, so look out to the sea where the fish all swim together as one. The occasional one might peel off, but they come back together again. And then look to the land where a tira tangata, a group of people, are wandering around aimlessly. Who is going to bring them together so that they think together, work together, exist together, and live together as one, like the ranga in the sea? And the answer is a rangatira. So the job of a rangatira is to keep the people together. To keep the people together, you need the resources. To keep the people together, you need a vision for the future. To keep the people together, there must be all of those values that we all know. Aroha. I was brought up with this notion of aroha. No matter what happens, kia aroha tētahi ki tētahi. Manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, we've heard it so many times today, all of these values. Moana was very careful to articulate the values in his report in English terms, in English words, but if you have a look at each of them, they're actually manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, all those tangas that we often talk about in our wānangas, they're all there. So being clear about what mana is, what rangatira is, what rangatiratanga is absolutely fundamental, because throughout my time, I have watched successive public servants, governments, courts try to redefine them. Don't let them redefine them. We know what they are. And we don't have to jump up and down. We just need to keep walking our talk as to who we are. So we get to a point in my whānau where if the Far North District Council or the Department of Conservation thinks it's going to come and tell us, we've got a gate in front of our land that says, no, don't come in here, and it's got a tino rangatiratanga flag. You know, it's painted the same as that tino rangatiratanga flag up there. It's called our tino gate. And everybody knows that don't go beyond that gate, because there's some people out there who won't let you operate according to tikanga Pākehā. Everything out there operates according to tikanga Māori. And nobody comes in there unless you're invited in there. And you know what? The police were quite happy with that, because that was less work for them to do. The council had a little bit of trouble 30 years ago being able to comprehend that they really could not come out there, that they would be ordered out, that they would be told they were trespassing. We did have trouble for a few years with the Department of Conservation just saying, oh, don't worry about them, keep going. Well, you know, our whānau know how to look after themselves, and they know how to deal with trespassers. So these days, it's actually been quite a few years now since we've had to say to anybody, you are trespassing, because everybody respects that beyond that gate is a whānau and a hapu who walk their own talk of their mana and their rangatiratanga, and we're quite happy and quite comfortable to do so. Sure, we're pōhara as hell, but hey, we make our own decisions about our own lives, and we live with the results of those decisions. And that's what I've seen coming through today, is that is where we can go, that we concentrate on strengthening our own mana and our rangatiratanga amongst ourselves, knowing who we are and then just walk the talk so that when the government comes along, when the Pākehā comes along, you are who you are. You don't have to pretend to be anybody else because you are who you are. And you're very, very strong in that. So, Bill, I see a lot of clarity in what was being said and a lot of common themes running through here that confirm for me that all of the talk I've been hearing over the last 5 years and before that is good and it's strong and it's very, very well grounded amongst our whanau and hapu. Okay? And our iwi, hey, for my whanau and our hapu, we go to the iwi when we need help with what we're doing. If we're having a bit of a battle somewhere, that's when we go to the iwi and say, can you give us a hand? We need a bit of help on this. And they come to us and say, can you give us a hand? And so we all talk about it. But by crikey, within Ngāti Kahu, no hapu tells another hapu what to do, no whānau tells another whānau what to do, and we are comfortable with that. We are who we are. So, hoi anō. Now, the one thing I do ask us to think about, please, over the time is, Moana recommended that there be a working group to work on the structures and the way forward. We haven't talked about that. I haven't heard anyone talk about that today, but it is something we need to give some thought to. I think we may have seen some of it coming through in He Puapua, and maybe that's somewhere where we can start on that sort of thing. But we do need to think about how we implement that recommendation of Moana's in Matike Mai Aotearoa. So I just want to thank every single one of you who has lasted right the way through this. We had a very good attendance through the morning session, and then, as I expected, we did lose some when we did the switchover into the workshops. But I have to say, you would have seen me flipping in and out of each of the workshops. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant stuff. And then to come back into the plenary and to hear all the kōrero coming from, you know, quite different aspects. And Chrissy, I can't help but we have to keep hammering the need to include those who have always been excluded, and the need for us, you know, because each of us in our own whānau, we have tangata whaikaha in our own whānau, and it's always angered me since I was a little child that my cousins were excluded. And then the aroha we need to have for our whanaunga from the Pacific, for our other whanaunga, and I want to thank Anjum for having been with us all day to acknowledge the Muslim community, but all those other communities who understand what we're doing and are there for us to manaaki. That was a term that came through really strongly today, manaaki. Thank you so much for being with us today and just hearing what we had to say and our thinking around this. So kia kaha tātou, and I'll never stop thanking Bill and Kim and all those hard workers down there who do all that work. So ngā mihi atu kia koutou katoa, ka hoki atu te rākau kia koe, Bill.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm just going, great, mate. So look, we've got Moana back.
Oh, lovely.
And I just want to hand over to you, Moana, please. And just to let you know, everyone enjoyed your kōrero this morning, and ka hoki a te rākau ki a koe e te rangatira. So can we unmute him? Just try again to unmute, mate. Unmute somewhere.
Kione, can you please unmute Matua, Moana?
Hang on a moment, Moana, you're still muted. We'll just have another go. Can you do that, Keone? Here we go. You'll go now. Thanks, my friend.
Has that made any difference?
That's good.
Cool. I'm just struggling with the technology here, everyone. Sorry. Kia ora, Bill. Kia ora, Margaret. Kia ora, everyone. I hope the hui's gone well so far. I'd kind of like to hear what people have been talking about before I add my little bit. So I don't know if someone could just give me a quick summary of what's happened so far. I'm sorry about that.
So could you do that, Margaret? Just summarize what you've just said.
Moana, lovely to see you, Moana. We've had some amazing kōrero coming through from, you'll have seen the ones who spoke today. After yourself, I spoke, and I just spoke about the things I usually talk about the process we went through, the number of things that happened. And then I'm just looking here at what we went through. Claire, Moana, I'm not sure if you're aware that the report He Puapua that was done on the implementation of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People has finally been released. It was released a couple of days ago to those who requested it under the Official Information Act. So Claire Charters talked about those steps that they are recommending be put in place so that we can achieve the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People by 2040. And of course, that's fundamental to ensuring that we implement our constitutional transformation. Then we heard from Veronica about all the work that the rangatahi did, and in particular their amazing workshops that they ran that were all whiz bang and full of technology and just amazing. And then Janelle spoke about the rangatahi themselves and the decisions that they made and the recommendations that they made, particularly around the values. Then we went into, we ran the videos of what the iwi chairs, various iwi chairs had to say about walking the talk of Rangatiratanga and what that should look like, with us making our own decisions around our own lives. And then we broke up into workshops, and in each of those workshops, people were talking about the need for clarity around what is Rangatiratanga, what is mana, what is a rangatira, and all of those quite fundamental values that we have. So there was need for that. There was a strong focus on hapu and the strength of hapu and of whanau as well. The need to be very clear about leadership and what is required in leadership. Knowing and building the capacity amongst ourselves and the confidence within ourselves to be who we are. And that is happening in some areas, but we need to just make it normalize being who we are so that we can exercise our mana and our rangatiratanga. I wrote heaps of notes as people were reporting back from the workshops. There was the need for inclusivity was very high as well, because too many have been excluded, and the need to bring them back in and make sure that everybody is included amongst our people, and then of course across the wider New Zealand community. Where are we? People, Bill, you can jump in where I'm skipping across things. the need, I just got a note here, the need to maintain our own systems. Balance was a very strong thing as well, about making sure that the balance is right between us and between the Rangatiratanga sphere and the Kāwanatanga sphere. The need to protect Papatuanuku, very, very strong, that as well. The values, Moana, the values came back to the manaakitanga, the kaitiakitanga, the whanaungatanga, the whakapapa, and those sorts of terms that we're very familiar with. And the need, of course, to recognise our tikanga as the first law of this country, and that it is a law in this country. There was reference to the second law and then a suggestion of a third law that involved both of those. I'm not quite sure how that works, and the need to be very cautious about government and Pākehā and public servants redefining our key fundamental values of manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, rangatiratanga. The ones that they are scared of, they often want to redefine quite differently. Anything else other than that, Bill? I know that there was so much that we covered.
No, just a couple of things, Moana. The way you articulated the values and the vision in Matike Mai got traction, a lot of traction. And then also the other thing is really a willingness to not just to keep the kōrero going, but to actually do things is coming through as well. And so we've got some levers to follow up on that. But yeah, but I think Margaret's picked up most of the other points. Just one other thing that came through too was the diversity of groups that were involved in the discussions, and also and how we can make sure that that's not lost. And but I think in terms of what we wanted to do today, in terms of focusing on strengthening Rangatiratanga, I think we got a whole lot of affirmation and a whole lot of pathways without having any, we haven't got the strong commitments that I wanted, but we've certainly got some pathways to work with and some groups to start getting a bit closer to. So, kei a koe.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you to everyone who's contributed today. It's really heartening, actually. I'd just like to make two sort of general comments first. I was interested that there was apparently discussion about what Rangatiratanga means, and that's a discussion which is always hamstrung and reinterpreted by the Crown. And since the early 1980s, the Crown, of course, has defined Rangatiratanga, certainly in Te Tiriti, as a subservient management authority subject to the power of the Crown. So it's rather like when under the original provisions of the Resource Management Act that iwi might be recognised as the kaitiaki, say, of a river. But kaitiakitanga was always a result of the effective exercise of Rangatiratanga. It was part of Rangatiratanga. But in the Crown view of things, kaitiakitanga is subject to Crown authority, or under the Resource Management Act, subject to the authority of a local body. And so I think it's important that we try to overcome that limiting of Rangatiratanga and reclaim its very clear meaning in He Whakaputanga, where it was defined as independence. So He Whakaputanga is not a declaration of subservient management rights. It's a declaration of independence. And if Rangatiratanga in He Whakaputanga meant independence, then 5 years later in Te Tiriti, it also meant independence. And if we accept that it's independence, then the challenge is, how do we define that in the 21st century? How do we make that a reality? But I think it's important that we encourage people to reach back to that meaning rather than get bogged down in the Crown definitions. I did a quick squiz through some Crown documents since 1986 about Rangatiratanga, and they've had 33 different definitions of Rangatiratanga. The only consistency in those 33 different definitions is that it was an authority subservient to the Crown. It seems to me our people have only ever had one definition, and that's independence. And so constitutional transformation depends on acknowledging the independence of iwi and hapu. And if we accept constitutional transformation as something less, as finding a better way to exercise a Crown-controlled management authority, then we're actually not talking constitutional transformation. We're talking about simply reforming the current Westminster parliamentary system. And so I would encourage everyone to, as I said, simply reach back to He Whakaputanga, and whether every iwi signed He Whakaputanga or not, the philosophies behind He Whakaputanga were known and accepted by every iwi, because no iwi in 1835 would have said that they were subservient to anyone else. And I often say that there's nowhere in Māori history where, say, Ngāpuhi would voluntarily agree to be subservient to the authority of Tūhoi. That simply never happened. There's nowhere in our history where that happened, where our people subordinated themselves to some management or even lesser role to another iwi. And it's simply fatuous to assume that in the treaty we decided to subordinate ourselves to the Crown. Rather, we reaffirmed our independence. And so the first thing, as I said, for me about constitutional transformation is working out how we make that independence a reality. And so the Rangatiratanga sphere is a sphere of Māori independence. It's not a sphere of Māori adjusting to the Westminster parliamentary system. So that's the sort of, I don't know, hope this doesn't sound too grand. That's the first sort of basic philosophical, political standpoint that I think is important. And different iwi, of course, had different terms. People talked about mana motuhake, mana take, mana tōrangapu, and so on. But the basic idea was always, we are an independent peoples, and you can't have by Māori for Māori unless Māori are independent. Otherwise it becomes by Māori for Māori subject to the Crown. The second point that I think is important is, I was pleased to hear you say, Bill, about the range of individuals and groups that have talked about constitutional transformation in the last 5 years since the report was published. And I can remember a couple of years ago being invited to a hui in Auckland that was organised by Asians for Tino Rangatiratanga to talk about constitutional transformation. And it was held in the community hall in Mangere. And I thought there'd be about a dozen people or something there. But the hall was packed. Old people, young people, Māori, Pākehā, Asian, keen not just to know what is this idea of constitutional transformation, but supportive of it and just wondering about how we achieve it. And I think one of the exciting challenges really in the next little while is how we build upon what has been a process really of osmosis since the report was published, where by word of mouth, people have talked about the report, have talked about the idea of constitutional transformation and how we build upon that in a constructive and institutional sense. Because to achieve constitutional transformation in its fullest sense will take time. The Crown, of course, will, for as long as it feels it can, will oppose the idea. But I've always believed that any great political constitutional change anywhere in human history doesn't come from the existing constitutional authority. It comes from the people demanding change. And so when I read the recent report that you referred to, Margaret, from the United Nations, it seemed to me that that becomes another tool that we can use in the process that lies ahead of us, that there is now an international recognition, not just of the self-determination that was recognised in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but a recognition of the right of Indigenous peoples to work towards that in ways that are consistent with Indigenous tikanga and so on. And I think that if we can take that tool, take the really quite inspiring willingness that's been elicited in the last 5 years and find ways to build upon that in the years ahead, then we will achieve that transformation by 2040. There will be lots of debates and arguments on the way, lots of debates and arguments about how iwi mana is preserved in a collective exercise of authority. But those are all debates for Māori to have, and they're not new debates, but they would be framed, I would hope, increasingly within discussions about an institutional construct that allows us to finally give effect not just to Te Tiriti, but to He Whakaputanga as well. And what I envisaged today's convention and this hui being was the first step and the next step of giving effect to what our people told us as we compiled the report for Matike Mai. And I'm not particularly fussed if the model we end up with mirrors what we suggested in the report or not, so long as we adhere to the values and that basic idea of independence. And our mokopuna may come up with better models, and that's fine. But if we cleave to the idea of independence and we cleave to the idea of a relationship based on that independence with the Crown and those who've come here after 1840, then I think we can't go wrong, and 2040 could be a really exciting year, actually. I'd be happy to answer any questions if that would be helpful, because I'm not sure what else I can say to add to what people have obviously already discussed today.
So open the floor, just ask away.
Tēnā koe matua. I don't have anything to ask, just to convey, and that's a feeling of gratefulness and appreciation for your mahi. I recall you coming to Whiti Ora Marae down at Te Tī to support Ngā Puhi in our challenge against the Crown in our stage 1 hearings, and this is a perfect opportunity for me to express our appreciation to you and all the hard work that you've done. I am left inspired by your kōrero this afternoon and your kōrero this morning, and that of Whaia Margaret's, and I can commit to you that I will continue talking about this topic and growing it through my hapu, knowing that it's in the interest of all Māori. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, thank you very much. I've always enjoyed going to Te Tī. I've often said, I think Margaret would have heard me say this, I love going to the north. At some stage, whenever I'm up there, someone will remind me that that's where Kahungunu came from, of course. And they take great pleasure and delight in reminding me of that. What I could perhaps talk about is the involvement I had in Bolivia, which I think I referred to in my kōrero this morning, and the process they went through originally, led by the indigenous peoples of Bolivia, to construct a new constitution, the constitution that was eventually based on, as I mentioned earlier, I think, the prime law of Pachamama. And rather like we tried to do, like Margaret and I and the rangatahi and others tried to do, was first they just travelled around Bolivia and asked people, indigenous peoples to begin with, that same question, if we could govern ourselves tomorrow, after 500 years of being governed by a constitution, in their case based on the Spanish parliamentary system, what would that look like? And once they had done that, then they knew that they'd have to expand the discussion beyond indigenous peoples. And so what they encouraged people to do, rather like Asians supporting Tino Rangatiratanga did with the Hui and Mangere a few years ago, was to organise little discussions in Hui for other groups, to begin a process of dialogue. And that took several years, but they ended up with the constitution, which was eventually put in place about 10 years ago now, I think. And it was a constitution which was unpopular with many other countries, because once a governing system gave effect to indigenous aspirations, then the role of multinational companies and taking raw materials like lithium from Bolivia, oil and so on, was felt to be jeopardized, which led to the coup recently, which overthrew the government elected under the new constitution. But they have since reclaimed that constitution. And I think they were able to do that because the process they went through was so inclusive, not just of indigenous peoples, but of people who'd made their homes in Bolivia, and I've certainly said to Margaret and Bill and others that I've been asked to go and talk to Rotary clubs about constitutional transformation, and I never thought I'd ever talk to a Rotary club. And I never got a standing ovation at the end of those kōrero, and I never got instant agreement. But I left each of those hui, and they were usually attended by 30 or 40 white businessmen. I got a sense that they first had heard things that they'd never heard before. Secondly, that they'd never realised that Māori had been talking about this since Pākehā first came here. And thirdly, that by and large, they were not closed off to the idea of constitutional transformation. They were nervous about it. They were worried about losing their power. But I always tried to point out that sharing power is not the same as taking power away from someone else. It's simply reforming the way in which power is exercised. And so it might well be that we can copy what the Sakik, or the indigenous peoples in Bolivia, did, is commit ourselves with friends and allies, and we do have friends and allies, to that process of reaching out to others to talk about this kaupapa. And that can be done either formally or informally. But it would seem to me, if we're able to do that, then in another 5 or 10 years, if we had a convention like this, which might be a good thing to aim for, it would be a convention which would involve a whole range of people from around the country. And that would be the time, particularly say if we had a convention in 2030, that would be a time to begin mapping out the nuts and bolts of constitutional transformation in an institutional sense, so that we're ready by 2040 to make some meaningful change. And so I would encourage all of you who've taken part today to simply reach out and talk to people that you work with, talk with your whanau, talk with friends, and become an advocate, if you like, for constitutional transformation, to show that it is a goal worth seeking, it is a goal that is achievable, it is a goal that lots of people, particularly those with vested interests in the current constitutional system, would oppose. Most importantly, to be aware that it would be a goal which the Crown would try to co-opt, that the Crown would try to redefine. And they're already doing that by talking about how can Parliament, for example, be more consistent with the treaty? Well, the only way in which Parliament can be consistent with the treaty in the end is if it recognises the independent constitutional authority of Māori. But the Crown response is to say, we can be more consistent with the treaty by allowing things like every government department will have a Māori name, every prison, every youth justice institution will have a Māori name. And I personally find that somewhat offensive, that they give these beautiful poetic names, probably given to them in good faith by some of our people, but they give these beautiful poetic tipuna names to say a youth justice facility that locks away our rangatahi. So that's how they will attempt to co-opt a discussion like this, that rather than acknowledge the independence and power that's the heart of the discussion, they'll try to control it and give it a Māori name. But if we are able to encourage a groundswell of discussion and commitment to something more than that, then the process of constitutional transformation, as our people talked about it in our report, then that will happen. But I think we need to be realistic, and those of you who've had dealings with the Crown on any issue, and I know Margaret and Ngāti Kahu are very aware of this, the Crown has got very good at trying to co-opt and therefore control Māori initiatives. And this talk of by Māori for Māori is the latest step in that process, because as I said this morning, in the end for them it's by Māori for Māori, but still under our control, rather like the Kaitiakitanga under the old Resource Management Act. So I think, as I said, and I won't say any more, but happy to take other questions if people have them. If we think it's worthwhile reaching out in our own way, in our own circles, to carry on this discussion aimed towards 2030 as a benchmark convention, to begin the nitty-gritty about how we actually do it, then I think that would be a good way to go, actually.
Kia ora for that, Moana, and just to let you know that He Puapua has got a pathway that looks exactly what you've, exactly as you've outlined. It is creating a succession of discussions for the realisation of that. Claire, do you want to make a comment there?
Kia ora koutou and tēnā koe Moana. It's lovely to see you, and thank you so much for all the thinking that you've done historically on this, and also for your contribution today. Every time I hear you speak, it fires off so many things in my head about what we can be thinking about going forward. And the place where I sometimes get stuck, and I think we got stuck a little bit in He Puapua, being frank, is on the structures and institutions. And I'm very mindful of your comment that Pākehā and sort of European ways of thinking about constitutions often get stuck on institutions, and we shouldn't be thinking that way. We should be thinking about values and more importantly, what should animate the constitution. But I still keep coming back to what ideas can we have for institutions. I'm trying to get my head away from institutions, but obviously any form of Rangatiratanga should be completely expressed by Māori, and we should go back to our independent and own ways of thinking about them. So I'm thinking that that's of course the starting point, but I do get stuck on how what are some visions. It doesn't have to be one vision, but what are some visions about what this might look like? I know that's an impossible question to answer, but it's the one that I get stuck on, and the one I would love to know if you've thought in concrete terms. But tēnā koe, it's lovely to see you too. And that smile.
Kia ora, Claire. It's so nice to see you too. And I know I've said this before, but thank you too for all the mahi you've done, particularly the international work. And I often think our people don't realise the relevance or the importance of the involvement internationally, and not just through the United Nations and other bodies, but simply through what we can learn. And I'm grateful that you've been able to continue to be part of that work. I get stuck in the same place that you do. Transferring a vision into a reality in institutional terms is never easy. But I believe that there would be an agreement among our people, certainly as there was when we were doing the Matike Mai work, about the values that should underpin a constitutional system. And the mistake we often make is we begin with a model and then try to fit the values within it. And so that's why we revert to a parliamentary system and then try to change the values upon which it operates. Because I've always thought if we're clear about the values, then the model will flow from the values. So if one of the values is caring for the land, say, then what is the best institutional way in which that can be done? If a value is simply manaakitanga, what is the best institutional way in which that can be done? And one of the mistakes I think we make when we look back at our own history, and this is because that history has been so often redefined by the Crown, is we think that our people were institutionless, that we didn't have institutions, that we didn't have a constitution. What we had was institutions and a constitution that were quite different to what we've grown accustomed to since 1840. And it may well be that as we recover more of our history, as our people become more familiar with what governed our lives before 1840, then we will find the seeds of a 21st century institution, not just within the values, but within our own history. And the models which we proposed in the report were really, in my view, just starters for discussion. Because if Te Tiriti does allow a place for people who've come here from somewhere else, while preserving the place of Māori, then the model has to reflect that value, if you like. And while the jump from the values to the institutional model is difficult, that Martin Luther King used to talk about turning the dream into a political reality as being the most difficult task that faced the civil rights movement in the States. And I think we are faced with the same thing. How do we actually transfer that vision into a practical reality? But I'm confident that if enough people are encouraged to talk and think about it, if enough people see the need for it, then those models will come. And I remember when I talked at the Eastern Hut Rotary Club, which was the first Rotary Club I got asked to speak to. My farmer sister, Noah Hutt, had heard me interviewed on national radio about the work we were doing. And he was the president of the Rotary Club and asked if I'd go. And at the end of that kōrero, one of them said, well, we need to think about a new model of government, don't we? And so he saw straight away that those values would lead to something different. And the mechanics of that are difficult, but I don't think they're insurmountable. And by setting 2040 as a date to aim towards, we were aware of that difficulty, that it would take time, not just to get people on board with the idea of constitutional transformation, but to give time to think about what that might mean in practical terms, what that might mean in relation to the current institutions of government and so on. But I still think that's achievable. And if I could say just one other thing that some of you have probably heard me say before, I don't like the Constitution of the United States very much. As some of you will know, it excluded Native Americans. It defined African Americans as only 2/3 human, was it, or 3/4 human, or something. And so I don't like that constitutional system and the vaunted checks and balances that they talked about that protect the integrity of each part of that system were always liable to be damaged and dismissed, as the last 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency have shown. But one of the things that they did in developing that constitution, and it was developed by all white men, of course, but one of the things they did was they travelled around what were then the 13 colonies and held town hall meetings and simply talked to people and said, we want to have something new for us. What we are familiar with is the Westminster system that we grew up with. And many of the drafters of that American Constitution were, of course, either themselves had been born and grown up in England or were the descendants of English people. So the only system they knew was the English parliamentary system. But the value of the town hall meetings that James Madison wrote about after the Constitution was finished was that it gave people space to think about what he called the intricacies of changing something that they know. And by aiming towards 2040, I would hope we're giving ourselves space to do the same.
Well, ngā mihi nui ki a koe te rangatira moana. I'm just so grateful for your contributions, not only to today, but over the last 40, 50 years that you've been a leader in this area, and we couldn't have done anything. It would have been terrible for us to even carry on with this convention without your presence, and I'm so grateful for you being able to be here. So ngā mihi nui kia koe e hoa, and we will keep in touch about this. Margaret, for your leadership over this kaupapa as well. Just while we were organising the convention, there are certain things that have to be ticked off and signed off and all the rest of it. And every time we contacted Margaret to say, you know, this, that, and the other thing, she immediately responded. And then, and it's been great to have this. I won't say it's been seamless or the easiest thing to organise, but Margaret's participation and leadership has made it very, very doable. And I want to thank all of the speakers because, you know, everyone put so much time and care and thought into what they had to say. And I really, really appreciate and value that, because we didn't offer you great sums of money to do it. You're not paid to do it or anything like that. And you're just wonderful. And what you had to say inspired everybody. And and certainly, once again, it's recharged my batteries. When we were going to have this kanohi ki te kanohi, we'd had all the venues organised up at the Copthorne Hotel and accommodation and flights and all the rest of it. And there was a team there to do that. And a lot of that work was led by Anahira, and who continues to be the hand that is holding up all of our backs. Just whatever we do, she's always there, and her team. And I want to thank you, Anahira, for still being here at the end of the day, you and your whanau, and contributing so much to this. The other thing is that I just had a little team around me in the design and preparation of this, and they saved me from having to do the details, because I'm not very patient with doing details and stuff, and particularly to Kim and to Jessica, particularly for putting the program together, the details of it together, and to and supporting me just whenever I needed to sound off or to fine tune some of my wayward thinking, which often happens. They were there to help make it work and to operate really well. And then when we had to go into the technology space and have it offline, my mokopuna Atarau came in with his time, skills, and all of that, and really helped us. And then, of course, we had this relationship that we managed to develop with Te Hiku FM, and they just, what they've contributed and how they contributed through a number of their people in planning and then doing it. And we're just so lucky, because it's helped us get this convention out into a wider audience, and it's helped us probably get rid of some of the glitches we may have had if we didn't have the technical savvy. So ngā mihi nui ki a koutou to you, Leonie, and your whanau. And there's and the other thing is that, you know, there are a bunch of people from time to time who I boss around and I say, look, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? And most of those facilitators that end up doing that work today, and just for, you know, for helping out and to just, you know, doing it just so with your hearts and with your skills. You know, just saves a lot of worry for someone who's organizing things, to know that you've got people like you to, you know, who are willing to do that sort of stuff. There's a handful of rangatahi who keep hanging in here and doing things, and you know, Safari's one of them, and Tahuia and Janelle and all that. And we've got this young woman, Amelia, who sort of poked her head up about 2 months ago and wanted to thing, and we didn't really have a proper job for her, and she's still here. She's hung in and she wants to help. And I think Moana, and Margaret, you know, when we're looking at at 2030, these are the people who are going to be there doing, doing the content stuff, and we just rely on them. Once again, some of the people who are online now, as soon as they heard about this, they've hounded me through that letter that you sent out to the organisations, Anahira, and you gave them my email address. They've chased me down and tracked me down and made me respond to them and that sort of stuff. And I just know that they're going to go out and share. So to people like you, Lisa, Ma, and all of that too, who've been insistent about keep me up to date, what's happening, how do I get involved and all that, thank you for that, for doing that. And there are just so many people, Ngāti Whātua helping us open up today. Unfortunately, Tame's had to go, and so Hemi, brace your shoulders, and to just to thank everybody for the kōrero. I hope you felt your voice was heard, and I hope you felt that you heard some really inspirational kōrero today, because it's been a great day. It's been a good day, and it's going to, when we get everything together, it's going to be a bit of a landmark once again in terms of constitutional transformation. We've ticked off one of the recommendations, Moana and Margaret, and we're gonna work at the others. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou, kia tātou katoa. I think it's time that I let you go to your whare and go and be with your families. And but I just want to say thanks so much to everyone. And if I've missed out anybody, it's probably because I didn't get much sleep last night worrying about what today was going to be like, and my mind's a bit foggy. But ngā mihi nui ka koutou katoa mā te atu e manaaki e te aki o koutou. And hand it over to you, Hemi, please.
Tēnā koe te hui a koutou ko ngā kai whakahaere, ngā kai whakarite, ngā kai hāpai, ngā kai tautoko i tēnei wānanga o tātou. Tēnā hoki rā koutou, ngā kai kōrero o tēnei rā. Meharo pai ki ngā kōrero kua puta mai. Ana ki a koe te rangatira Moana, me pehera nā mihi ki a koe. Nō mātou te maringa nui kei konei koe hei arataki, hei kōrero ki te kaupapa kai mui te aroaro. Kia tau ai, tonu te manaakitanga o te rongorawa ki rungi a koutou, ki rungi a koe hoki. Anei te karakia hei whakamutu, hei whakauti i tō tātou wānanga. Mō reira, kia tau tonu te rangi Māori e, ki rungi a tātou katoa. Ruia, 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 ruia ki runga, ruia ki raro. Ruia ki waho, ruia ki roto. Ruia ki uta, ruia ki tai. Hu ana ki te rangi, turu ana ki nuku nā, kua tau, kua mau, kua ea, tihewa, Māori ora.
Kia ora. Māori ora, kia ora tātou. Kia ora Hemi.
Ngā mihi koutou katoa.
Ai. Pai te kiti a koe e Moana, ka kite anō. Kia ora, aroha nui ki a koe no au, Anahira, me Dagi. Kia ora.